Hello there, listener. Tonight I would like to talk to you about what I call a generational ethic. Now, this could go by many names, and it has certainly been written about many times before. And I will preface by saying that when I talk about the importance and the necessity of a generational ethic in culture, I don't mean to offend those of you who, to no fault of your own, have grown up without a father in your life, without a mother in your life, without generational support. I think that the essence of what I'm saying, I think you can find that in other ways, even if you have a unfortunate family life. So bear with me in what I'm saying. Let's start by just picturing the unbelievable scale of lineage. We start off with your mother and your father. Two people combine from sperm to egg to fetus to make a child. It's the biology of it. Don't ask me to explain much more than that. That's the biology of it. But of course, both your mother and your father each have their own pair. And each of those grandparents have a pair, and so on and so forth. And within 10 generations, you have over 500 ancestors. And that's surely a lot of people. And I think that for most of us, we don't really know. We don't know much about our lineage, our ancestry. I would probably wager that for more than half the population, you wouldn't really know much about more than one of your great grandparents, and certainly not your great 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 grandparents. That's specifically reserved. That form of knowledge of your ancestry is usually reserved for the elite or clans or other familial groups that have done a lot of work to preserve and put a lot of value into their bloodline, into their family culture and where they came from. But for most of us, our families have not been so stable. They have not been so um, they have not had such a clean narrative, especially not in the last few decades, as I will soon get into. I want us to go beyond the picture, the mental schema of looking at generations simply as a biological transfer of matter from father and mother to a child. Go beyond that in terms of what they pass down as pure material. Let's go beyond that. Excuse me. I had some terrible dessert tonight, and you'll excuse me. I want you to think in your own life, listener, how much your mother has given to you. And when I say given to you, I don't mean bread and cupcakes. I don't mean a warm bed, although those things are very nice. I mean all her mannerisms, her preferences, her attitudes, her ways of speaking, her ways of being. Think about all the ways in which those actions, those ways of being have affected you and have slowly throughout your life transferred onto you and affected the way that you are. And again, if you don't have a mother in your life, I am so sorry. Hopefully there is someone who's acted as a mother figure to you. And just think about it. And I would say all those things that I mentioned in terms of what that transfer is could be simplified to mean ethic. And you could say ontology or ways of being, but ethic is a clean word to give off to kind of get to the point of what I'm saying. And then, of course, you have your father. And your father gives you a whole other set of rules, norms, values, attitudes. And in my opinion, if you're in a healthy family, then you're going to get two different, distinct sets of those things coming down on you. One representing like the masculine archetypes, the masculine characteristics, the masculine lessons that need to be learned about the world, and the feminine. And of course, this will differ depending on if you are female or male, and of course, women can have a lot of masculine tendencies, and men can definitely have a lot of feminine tendencies, especially in our era of low testosterone, which we are currently facing. It's a crisis. And so picture what that has done to you and how that has shaped what kind of person you have become. And then, dear listener, think about how the exact same process, hopefully, happened both to your mother and your father in what kind of person they became from learning from their mother and father and your grandfather and your grandmother. Which means that in that transfer, you could say indirectly or directly, because you, of course, you would also know your grandparents, hopefully. You, by very nature of this generational lineage, are also picking up the ways of being, the ethic of your grandparents, because your grandparents are transferring it down to your father or your mother. And again, this can be large in scope. This can be like the way that you handle money, like a very large life lesson, like, being frugal, just as an example, or making a monthly budget. Because like some families, like a part of my family, it was taught that budgets are important. Keeping track of money is important. Keeping track of investment is important. And that would have been learned from generation to generation, passed on down. It can be large scale things like that, or it can be tiny little things like holding the door, saying bless you when someone sneezes, which, by the way, happens less and less these days. I don't know if you've noticed this, but when I sneeze in public, I seldom am getting the bless you, which in my youth was much more common, but that's obviously a tangent, a one that gets me worked up at that. But so it's these large ways of being, and also these tiny ways of being, and I was reading these cultural theorists who talk about culture being not these grand, large-scale activities like festivals or Olympic Games. These like huge public festivals. That is certainly part of culture. But at the base level, and the thing that forms and builds to those large-scale, cultural events, is what they would call habitus or habit. The ways in which you live your life, all the small things that make up, a people, a culture, that then lead up into these like symbolic manifestations of that habitus, like the Olympic Games for Greece, for example. And so thinking about your family, this can go back and back and back. Your father was taught by his father, let's say, how to fish. And his father was taught by his father how to fish. And so on and so forth. Back to when your father, 15 times removed, was used to fish at a small English lake in outside of Liverpool. Right? I mean, and that lesson, you then, if you've picked up that lesson, have indirectly learned it from that far off ancestor who passed it down, who then passed it down, who then passed it down. And you are a combination of all these lessons that have transferred to you into the ethic that you now inhabit as a person, and that, you know, how I feel, like what I feel is that you have a responsibility to pass that down to the next generation, to continue that generational ethic. And so there's several tangents I could go on from here. I don't want to go for too much longer because I want this point to be succinct. But I think we can easily picture ways in which our culture has succeeded in doing this, and ways in which our culture has not succeeded. If you listen to the sadness and the critiques and everything that's said about residential schools of natives, orchestrated by the British government in combination with the Canadian British government in combination with the Catholic schools, a massive aspect of that criticism and of that outcry is the fact that children were separated from their parents. So what happens then? Well, they don't pick up on the cultural lessons, the ethical and the ethic lessons that parents naturally pass down to their child, simply by the way that they act. Children learn so much just by observing their parents, and so taking them away from their parents, it permanently has them break with that centuries, millennia long lineage. And so this is where the accusations of cultural genocide come from. It's not enough to just give them, it's not that it's not enough. It's criminal in many ways to give them just another system, another ethic, the British liberal, Enlightenment ethic, whatever you want to call that ethic that was taught in the residential schools. And it could be argued that that's more civilized, that creates that created more peace in the country, that created more stability and allowed for economic growth to happen. All those things could be argued in favor of residential schools. But the point remains is that that program permanently ruptured that lineage, that generational ethic. No longer could that child, becoming an adult, teach and pass on those lessons to their next generation. And if they did, it was watered down. It was not as genuine. It was trying to make up for what they had lost. And this is how cultures over time break down. Habits and ways of being stop becoming genuine, and therefore teaching your children no longer becomes viable. It's the breakdown of religion. When people stop believing in, let's say, Christianity, for example, they no longer feel justified and they no longer feel right in forcing it on their kids and teaching their kids. There's no longer that enthusiasm to pass it down. And so I think that cultures are healthy when there is a similar generational ethic among the members of that culture. And again, it can be learned. Someone that's adopted can learn what that ethic is from their new adopted parents. I do believe that, although there is a biological basis. I'm not saying that genetics are not important. They certainly are. But I do have hope that people can get out of that difficult position of being abandoned, is what I'm trying to say. But I'll conclude with this. Much of what was thought to be the Canadian ethic, the Canadian culture, was systematically thrown away and abandoned in the 1960s and onwards. And this was a slow process. I'm not saying that it happened as soon as Lester B. Pearson got elected in 1963, defeating John Diefenbaker. I'm not saying that it happened all at once. But many of the cultural lessons, the norms, the values that were passed down generation to generation in Canada came from a framework that was rooted in the British Isles. And I'm talking about English Canada here, obviously. Was rooted in the British Isles, was rooted in a form of Protestant Christianity. And it took many, many, many generations to build this up. And this is what scares me about what happened. We decided to completely walk away from that lineage. We changed our flag. We changed our anthem. We changed the stories we tell in schools, our narratives. We changed the priorities of our international relations. We changed the character of the people. We changed all these parts about what we thought was the basis of passing things down to the next generation. What we were supposed to tell our kids about who we are as individuals and who we are as a larger culture. Because the breakdown of the closeness to Britain doesn't just come from the government. No, a culture doesn't function well if the government is leading everything. No, a culture stems from individuals and families and groups working together and also achieving individual greatness as well. And so that severing from Britain happened both among the government, but also the way the individuals thought of themselves as well. The first generation Canadians came from there. And so they obviously had that tie, and then they pass it down to their children. So this is the greatest generation. So people born in 1890s were born from a lot of people who came over to Canada from the British Isles. So they were taught to have these British ways of being. That generational ethic went back centuries and centuries. But them growing up in Canada, that greatest generation born around 1900, it no longer had the same confidence in what to teach their children. And this, of course, leads to the baby boom. And the baby boom generation rejects it all. Or at least the most radically loud ones. They weren't all like that, of course. But the ones that the media and the sort of liberal establishment lifted up, they rejected it all and said, we need to create something new. It was the founding of a new religion, for all I'm concerned. We need to create something completely new. And we need to pass that down. But man, oh man, is that a fundamental, profound change that happened. Because generational ethic, it takes a lot of effort, time, and energy, and great acts to build. It doesn't just come from signing a piece of paper or an acid trip at 19 years old. No. It comes from of generations and generations of people acting and refining on their values, and what they've learned over time. And so this young generation that I and hopefully some of you are part of, we've grown up in this wake of a lack of generational ethic. And some of you definitely still have that. I still have remnants of a generational ethic, and I try to take from what I can to pass down. But many of us, especially those that grew up without a father, for example, have grown up in the wake of a generational ethic. And food for thought. I think we need to build something up. So thank you.